So pleased to have you join us for our first webinar hosted by the Center for Sustainable Behavior and Impact. We have a truly incredible lineup of presentations for you today. But before we dig in on those, I wanted to take a moment to celebrate the really powerhouse audience that we have joining us. We were so moved, frankly, by how many people signed up and what incredible expertise we have in the audience. So we'd love to take a couple of moments to hear from you as folks are logging in. Please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're calling in from, what your role is with respect to recycling or in the circular economy, and if it's top of mind, what your most pressing recycling challenges are. And I know we have folks logging in, so, I see a raised hand. Would you like to introduce yourself in the chat? Just going to ask our webinar logistics. I see a raised hand from a couple of folks too. Do we have a question that we want to share? If you don't mind sharing that in the chat. Oh. Okay, so if you've just joined us, we would love, I think potentially we might be having trouble with our chat. If you are able to introduce yourself in the chat, we'd love to get warmed up there. We'd love to hear where you're joining us from, what your role is, and what your most pressing recycling challenge is. And I'd love to, I'm seeing some introductions. Great to see you, Susan, Pam. Oh, St. Paul. We've got some Texas in the house. I love that. Florida, California. Wow, this is awesome. I'm so glad. And I love the energy too. Let's keep that up as we go. So now that we've got a nice energy flowing in the chat, I want to welcome you all once again to our first webinar hosted by the Recycling Partnership Center for Sustainable Behavior and Impact. I'm Louise Bruce, and I have the great pleasure of being your guide through today's conversation. We'll be discussing how to incorporate motivational messaging into your recycling education and outreach programs. And before we dig in on that, I'd like to start with a couple of housekeeping notes. So as you can probably tell by now, we're using Zoom's webinar format for today's webinar. So what that means is that as an audience member, you'll be able to see our presenters, but our presenters won't be able to see you. And so that's why we did that little warm up in the chat. We really want to make sure they feel your presence. We invite you to be loud in the chat, if you will, by sharing questions, comments, emoji reactions. We have a great team here who will be collecting questions and comments as we go. We've reserved a few minutes at the end of the webinar for questions, and those will be from the questions we gather throughout the presentations. And lastly, I just want to give a plug in advance. We'll be sending out a survey after this webinar. This is the first of a series hosted by the center, and your responses to that survey will help us shape future webinar conversations so that we make sure we're giving you, delivering the sort of content and programming that is most helpful for you in driving your recycling programs. Okay, so I am profoundly grateful to be joined by such a spectacular group of presenters today. We'll begin our program with a look at our audience segmentation research with Elizabeth Schussler, the Senior Director of Social Change, Behavior, and Impact at the Recycling Partnership. I'm so lucky to get to collaborate with Elizabeth on a daily basis because she brings decades of experience cultivating meaningful engagement and scalable results to the Recycling Partnership. Her deep expertise and insights in behavioral design and communication, personal and social dynamics, and knowledge of the recycling system have really shaped the center, which I'll tell you more about in a few moments. Next up, we'll learn from Michelle Metzler, Director of Community Programs at the Recycling Partnership, about how we can leverage the insights we gained from Elizabeth's audience segmentation research to create impactful motivational messaging on the ground. Michelle has 15 years of experience supporting cities in solid waste management, conducting research, and implementing data-driven best practices to increase recycling. At the Recycling Partnership, we're so lucky to have her overseeing recycling program optimization and multifamily technical assistance programs. We'll then pivot to hear from Joseph Sherlock about methods for effectively correcting misinformation. Joseph is a principal behavioral scientist at Duke University, where he leads a team focusing on using behavioral science to bring innovation into civic society. Joseph brings a passion, and truly, I have to say that passion is infectious. I'm so excited for you all to meet him later today. He has a passion for using behavioral science as a vehicle for evidence-based and evidence-generating innovation. We're so grateful that he's shared his expertise with us at the Recycling Partnership by serving as a really critical launch advisor for our center. And I promise you'll want to stay to the very end of this program so that you can hear from Lisa Ruggiero, Assistant Director of Programs at Syracuse University Center for Sustainable Community Solutions. Lisa specializes in outreach and education initiatives, especially related to waste reduction, reuse, and recycling. She draws on 14 years of experience in sustainable materials management and really has a knack for finding creative ways to connect with audiences through effective messaging. So I hope you stay with us to the bitter end so you can make sure to get that great presentation. Okay, so before we hear from these really expert panelists, I want to make sure we're centering ourselves in why we're here, why we're doing this work. So I'll take a few moments to share why the Recycling Partnership is so focused on household recycling behaviors. I'm sure everyone who's joining this call is really intimately aware that when it comes to recycling, there is a very significant intention action gap. So what does that mean? Despite consistently high levels of public support for recycling, we find that half of all residential recyclables are lost to landfills each year due to behavior gaps. So even though in surveys we hear that 80% of Americans say recycling is worth the effort, recycling is a service that should be provided in my community, recycling is a responsibility that I should take on and my neighbors must take on, we're still not gathering all the material or not capturing all the material that we could coming out of participating households. That adds up to a very significant 15 million tons nationally, or the equivalent of 63 million metric tons of carbon dioxide. This next slide sort of illustrates how we come to that 50%. So if you look at, say, the average 10 homes in the United States, they're generating somewhere around 7,600 pounds of recyclable material per year. We know from our studies, from our grants, from the work we've done on the ground in communities that somewhere around 30% of those households are not participating at all. So right off the bat, we lose 2,100 pounds of available recyclable material from those homes, even though they have access to collection. Then among the remaining 7 households, or 70% of households that are participating, we know that those households on average are still putting about 40% of their recyclables in the trash. And so I have actually on the right hand of the screen here, you can see how that breaks down across materials. So there's, a pretty tremendous amount of variability with cardboard, meeting 80%, whereas we're losing about 70% of the available polypropylene, as an example. But on average, that loses us another 2,100 pounds of recyclables from that set of 10 households. So you can see how we're losing material both from households that are not participating and then households that are participating but not participating as effectively as they could be. So with that challenge, really enormous challenge in mind, we launched our Center for Sustainable Behavior and Impact, where we've been focused on identifying solutions, evidence, and best practices for driving measurable improvement in recycling behaviors. Earlier this summer, some of you may have seen that we published our first knowledge report, which is the culmination of a very substantial portfolio of research that many on this call participated in. It included surveys of more than 10,000 Americans, and the real-world testing, I think this is really important, the real-world, sort of in-home testing of interventions reaching more than 52,000 homes. So this is a very broad portfolio of research that we're really proud of. And that research made clear for us a very central and important tenet that people intend to recycle And we believe it's our collective responsibility to clear the way for them to act. And so to do that, our team is laser focused on the following 4 themes. Oops, yeah, there you can see them. The first is that we must have systematic communications. People must have confidence in recycling outcomes. So they need to believe that the recyclables they set out at the curb are being made into new things. Education and outreach must be tailored to meet people where they are, to engage multicultural audiences, and to allow us to move beyond a blanketed approach to communications. And fourth, our recycling systems must be designed with behavior in mind. So the tools we offer, the sort of context, the setup, how people are recycling in their homes, are all places where we think we could really improve the tools and services we're delivering. So with that, I want to say just a note that this webinar and future webinars as part of this series are really focused on unpacking these 4 themes with you. We want to dig in so that we can share the evidence we have that you can in turn take and activate on the ground and use to drive real increases in participation in your local recycling programs. So I thank you all for joining us for this important conversation. Again, I really want to emphasize the tremendous expertise in the audience. So we want to hear from you as much as we're sharing our evidence. And with that, I invite Elizabeth to take the mic and tell us all about our audience segmentation.
Fantastic, Louise. I also echo the distinct joy of working with Louise at the center and all of our internal staff, as well as our partners across many communities I see in here in the chat, and organizations, companies, and I think I saw a national park in there, or at least some parks. My name is Elizabeth Schussler. I'm going to talk with you a little bit about segmentation. So with the information that Louise shared with us, that half of our recyclables are going to landfills, we know we've got to do something about it. So how do we address that? So we turned to segmentation research. We worked with a reputable and a seasoned company, a market researcher on this. We started with surveys and focus groups and interviews and diaries. People took pictures of what was happening, what their questions were, that sort of thing. And we took all of that information and we shaped that into a really hefty survey. That survey went out to 2,500 people who reported that they had curbside recycling. So we're starting with that group because we know they have everything that they need. And it's really frustrating when someone doesn't have access to tell them to recycle, and it's so easy. So we started with single family with curbside or single families with curbside recycling. So we wanted to look at the obstacles. So it's more of like a psychographic segmentation. It would be really great if demographics worked, but as you can imagine, people of the same age, of the same income, of the same location, don't think like and don't act alike when it comes to recycling. So this segmentation focuses on attitudes, obstacles, and behaviors. And telling you a little bit more about that, across the segments, even the sort of like top line, we saw that 1 in 5, 20%, need more capacity. They need larger bins or more frequent collection. So some of those recyclables that are ending up in the landfill could just be because people run out of space, especially if there's like a holiday or they miss a week. 1 in 3 are frustrated that they're not seeing other people. So the social cues and the social pressures, 33% of people are just, kind of on the fence of like, I don't know. I feel like I need more people to do it if I'm going to feel good about doing it. 25% are facing functional barriers, meaning space in the home or a lack of bins or like cleaning out things. So I think of this as kind of the willingness to find solutions and work through the challenge that they might have in recycling. And then 40% report confusion in the moment. A third of people say they don't really have what they need. But what does that look like across the segmentation? So the big picture is there were 12% of people who said they do not recycle. And that's 12% is spread across these 5 segments. The 5 segments break down into 2 groups roughly. Half of the people are dedicated, the dark green and the navy on the one side, and then half are less dedicated, more frustrated and confused. And so to me, the half that are dedicated, they have a lot of similarities, but they're not exactly the same. The half that are not or less dedicated are more of a mix. The 18% of the discouraged self-doubters tend to be smaller households. There's not someone there to kind of, there's not an in-home champion to kind of make them accountable. If they have questions, they don't have someone to ask. The detached biters tend to be older folks who are sort of just coming along in the programs. They're probably losing a lot in capture. They've been recycling a while, but they're just not superstar recyclers. And then they're just not really even thinking about it. They're not paying attention to it. The 16% of conflicted and overwhelmed is a really interesting group. They're younger, they're higher income, they're ethnically diverse, they have larger families. There's a lot going on in these homes, and they're feeling the pressure from both sides. They're looking things up online, and they're feeling like they want to recycle and recycle well. They're worried about messing up a whole load if they do it wrong. And then there's a small number within that group that are feeling pressure from the other side of being judged if they do recycle. So it's a really complex and interesting breakdown of the different types of recyclers. So that's what people said. Now, what do people do? So I took a look at what our feet on the street data is, which so observation of about 50,000 households. It really breaks down about the same. There are 10% and 40%. So half of the people are doing pretty good. They're participating and they're accurate. A lot of the, some of the data in here is about participation and some of it is about contamination. And then the other half are kind of struggling. Like a quarter of people are not yet recycling. And so we want to weigh what people are saying with what they're doing. And that's something that the Recycling Partnership is really good at. And Michelle will tell us a bit more about that coming up. The other interesting opportunity that comes out of this segmentation is to look at it through regions. Now, the large map that you see with all the dots on it, those dots represent the kinds of access. So you can see there's a big area in the middle where there's not much going on, but there really aren't a whole lot of people in that area. If you took a look at the census map of population, it looks a little bit like this as well. The green dots of curbside programs and the blue dots of subscription are the people who theoretically could be recycling every week. But when you look at how the segmentation relates to the access, you can see in areas with more of the green and navy blue dots, there are more of the two navy blue and dark green are our most committed, most dedicated recyclers. You can see that the correlation between access and commitment to the service showing up in how people feel. So it's not surprising, but what this unpacks for us is some different strategies where we can address things regionally, in addition to understanding in a community how what people need and how they are viewing recycling. They might need to hear something about, like they might believe that it's hard or it's messy, or they might not have the tools or the commitment to the planning. So there are different tactics and messaging that we can take, and Michelle will walk us through that. But first, we want to take this poll. Which of the audience segmentations do you have the most difficulty reaching? If you're not a community, if you're an organization or something, just vote on which one do you think is most difficult to reach. I can't see the poll, so I see everything hot in the chat, which is great.
Oh, here's our poll.
So thanks for everybody who put it in the chat. If you would also answer the click in the poll here as well. The other thing I want to mention while those results are coming in is there's a report on our segmentation. There's a link to it in the chat. Scrolled up a little bit and it'll come up again. Oh, look at that magic. If you have research or data about the kinds of recyclers in communities or across the nation, I would love to have a conversation with you about that. So reach out.
I think we're not quite at 100%, but we're seeing a clear pattern that echoes exactly what we were sort of curious about in the audience segmentation. Elizabeth, any thoughts on what you're seeing in this poll?
You know, it's not surprising. And the thing that we also want to keep in mind is there is some chatter in the media or throughout some communities about whether or not my efforts are worthwhile, whether or not recycling is actually becoming new things. And so we want to make sure we're paying attention to that, because these three segments of discouraged and detached and conflicted are hearing those things, and it's an easy out for them to go from being on the fence about recycling to letting themselves off the hook to say, oh, I don't think it's really happening, so I'm not going to bother.
Yeah, this is really interesting to see. I really appreciate everyone participating. And this is the perfect segue over to Michelle's presentation, which, as Elizabeth noted, we'll look at how we then took the audience segmentation results and thought about how to use them to develop impactful motivational messaging. Just before we segue over to Michelle, I wanted to say, first of all, thank you, Elizabeth. That was awesome. If you have any questions for Elizabeth.
Or can we share the results, Louise?
Oh, I don't know if everyone can see. Can everyone see them now? Hopefully. We're seeing very strong kind of questions around how do we reach our discouraged self-doubters, our detached abiders, and our conflicted and overwhelmed motivational segments. And that is exactly what Michelle will dig in on. Before I pass the mic to Michelle, please just a reminder that if you have questions for Elizabeth, toss them in the chat, and Megan, Paloma, and Kevin will be gathering them up for our Q&A session. With that, over to you, Michelle.
All right, well, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm going to be really just showing how we use the research that Elizabeth talked about and to apply that to pilots in communities. So, it's great to know what people say about recycling, but we really also want to understand how it impacts their actual behavior in communities. So I'll be sharing a couple of examples where we used motivational messaging in pilots in both Reynoldsburg and Chicago. So before I share the motivational messaging, I just want to make sure that we all have a common understanding of where motivational messaging and where behavior change tactics really align with recycling access. So not only is it important to make sure that people are engaged in recycling, but we also want to make sure that we have the right system set up to incentivize and make the behavior that we want residents to engage in the natural choice. And so through our various research, looking at programs around the country and our capture rate data, we estimate that the average household generates between 750 and 800 pounds of recyclables per year. And depending on the system that's in place, that's going to drastically impact the amount of capture of materials. So you'll see that, when communities have drop-off only, there's minimal capture of materials. And as they build a system that makes recycling easier, with universal access and good education, that really increases recycling capture even more. And so really working in this 400 pounds per household and above group is where it's really important to have evidence-based tailored engagement to get to that 800 pounds per household. So even communities that are doing really well and capturing 400 pounds per household are still losing almost half of recyclables. And so that's really where the center is focused on developing tools and resources to increase that capture even further. And another way to think about this is thinking about what communities and residents need to recycle well. So that's where, in order for residents to recycle, they need to have infrastructure, which is convenient access to recycling. They need to have knowledge about what is recyclable, when and how to recycle as well. So if they don't know their collection day, as an example, that's something else that's going to be a barrier to recycling. And then finally, to have engagement and really thinking about, is the recycling information that's being delivered relevant and compelling? And so that's where motivational messaging can really be an important tool in improving recycling, is when knowledge and engagement are the areas where there's the biggest opportunity for improvement. So now I'm going to dive into 2 of our pilots where we looked at motivational messaging to improve recycling behaviors. So as we were planning the pilots, we looked at the audience segmentation research that Elizabeth talked about. And really the biggest area to improve capture is for those recyclers that are frustrated, confused, and less dedicated. So that half of the population that you all also shared, you had trouble reaching. Those are the folks that we wanted to research with motivational messaging. And so using that segmentation data, we developed 20 different concepts. And then we shared those 20 different concepts with infrequent recyclers in mind, and asked for their feedback and asked them what would motivate them to recycle. And so with those 20 different concepts, we landed on these 3 designs as the infrequent recyclers telling us that these would be the most motivating messages to help them recycle more. So the first one is this empathy message. It's the cat hedgehog combo on the screen here, where the cat is confused about recycling. The second is a logical message, which I think looks like a lot of the messaging that we in the recycling industry use, where we're showing residents what happens to their recyclables. And even though this message doesn't really show the full picture, infrequent recyclers told us that understanding that their recycling goes somewhere would help them recycle more. And then finally, we had this emotional message, which is a picture of a landfill and the question, ever wonder what tomorrow will bring? And that, again, these infrequent recyclers said that message would motivate them to recycle. So then we took these messages into the field on a small scale pilots in Chicago, and then a larger scale pilot in Reynoldsburg, Ohio. So in Chicago, the context of the recycling is also important when thinking about the motivational messages. So Chicago has universal recycling in carts with every other week recycling. So they have the infrastructure in place to really deliver motivational messaging and have it be compelling. So in Chicago, we took 3,600 households and divided them into 14 intervention groups with 1 control. And in this pilot, we didn't just test motivational messages. We also tested in-home tools like in-home recycling bins or spatulas to make recycling or make container cleaning more convenient. And then we coupled those with all 3 different messages delivered in multiple forms, which included mailers and cart tags. And then we looked at recycling cart volumes to determine the effectiveness of the different tactics. So before I share the results, we wanted to do our second poll and ask which of these 3 messages do you think was most compelling and really helped increase recycling in these pilots? So it's interesting to see the results come in. At first, the empathetic was a strong lead, and now it looks like it's much more split. So we'll go ahead and give it away, at least for our micro pilots here in Chicago. With these, one of the things that I was really surprised about was that the motivational messages had a larger impact even than things like the in-home tools, like a recycling bin. What we saw here was that the cart tags and mailers delivered by using the emotional and empathetic messages increased average recycling volumes relative to the control. So the motivational messaging alone had more impact even than other tools that could have increased recycling. So we took those same tactics and then applied them on a much larger scale, working in the city of Reynoldsburg, Ohio. So this again is a community that already had universal recycling in carts, but they happened to have weekly recycling service. So again, they had a good system in place to deploy motivational messaging. And so with this, we divided the city into 4 groups, 3 intervention groups and 1 control. And then we delivered motivational messages by cart tag and by mail to see which one would have the largest impact on recycling setouts and recycling route tons. And similar to Chicago, we found that the motivational message delivered in the empathetic, so that cat hedgehog combination, and the emotional message with the picture of the landfill had the largest increase in recycling route tons. So the empathetic message group increased recycling route tons by 38%, and that impact was sustained for 3 months, which is the point where we stopped tracking this pilot, but we're continuing to track the data so that we can see how long that increase is sustained to help inform future research and future campaigns. And then we also found that the emotional message group had a 16% increase in average recycling route tons. I think this is particularly interesting because the logical message actually didn't have an increase. It was the same trend as the control. And so even though residents received 5 reminders about recycling, there was no impact relative to the control. And I think that it's also interesting because the logical message group is, I think, what a lot of us in the recycling industry point to as something that we think will increase recycling. And it's just really important to remember that we're not the target audience because we are probably falling in that more dedicated recycler bucket. And really, we want to make sure that we are engaging those households that are frustrated, confused, and less dedicated. So making sure that the messaging is tailored at that group. And lastly, I just wanted to, again, remind folks of the role of motivational messaging is that, motivational messaging is a great tool, but that it can't necessarily solve all of our challenges around recycling participation and capture. And so as we're working in our own communities, it's important to conduct and reference research. And the Knowledge Report has a ton of great resources to start from. Really focus on the audience that we're seeking to change behavior, because we know we need to target solutions based on those who need the assistance and have the greatest opportunity for increasing recycling. And then ultimately deploy interventions and then measure the outcomes to see how recycling was changed. And when it comes to motivational messaging is a great tool to help address gaps in knowledge, increase recycling awareness, increase confidence, and then make recycling more relevant and compelling. And additionally, motivational messaging can help reassure residents that recycling is worth the effort. And recycling does require sustained effort because it's an action that people need to engage in daily. And so even those who are dedicated recyclers still need reassurance that their efforts are worth it.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I want to flag, I answered in the chat, but just wanted to give you a chance to respond to a question we get quite a bit on that graph a couple slides ago, which is, did the logical message actually decrease recycling participation? I just want to make sure everyone understands the numbers we put up.
Great question. So no, there was no decrease when comparing the pre-recycling route tons and then the post-recycling route tons. There was a decrease in the control. And so the logical message group essentially behaved the same as the control, but there's no reason to think that the intervention caused that decrease because the control had a similar decrease. So it's likely just due to seasonality.
I hope that makes sense for everyone. And I'm seeing a ton of questions about, can we get access to these slides? Can we get access to the reports? Paloma is diligently in the chat, making sure that you're getting links to the reports we're referencing. But we'll also send a summary and a link to the recording, so you'll be able to check back on this. But another question I'm seeing quite a bit to get ahead of our Q&A is, Michelle, if I'm persuaded, if I'm seeing this and saying, wow, motivational messaging that's crafted using audience segmentation and evidence really can work, and I'm persuaded that I want to test this out in my community, what's my next step? How can I get involved with the recycling partnership?
First of all, I would just encourage you to stay with us. So these are 2 pilots that we conducted in 2022, but we're not done yet, and we're continuing to research this. So we're currently working on 2 pilots where we're testing this message further, one in Virginia and one in California. And we really want to further study this to really understand the impact. And so if you're interested in collaborating with us, please keep in touch. You can email us at thecenter@recyclingpartnership.org to partner with us and to test this messaging further. And then you'll also see another example from New York later in this webinar.
Thank you so much, Michelle. This work is really motivating, to borrow from motivational message, really motivating for me to see this really work and play out on the ground. We're going to shift now to our next speaker. But before we do that, we want to hear from you with one final poll. And so our question is misinformation about recycling impacting your participation in your local recycling program? So some of you may be hearing, is this actually recyclable? Are you just throwing my materials out? You may be seeing posts online, for example, from your residents. So we're curious to hear, is misinformation a challenge for you? So it's great to see these come in. I am happy to hear that there's a couple of no's. I'm so glad. But I'm seeing, based on the poll results that are coming in right now, that the majority of us are feeling a pretty significant impact from misinformation. And that's exactly why we wanted to bring Joseph into the conversation. While Joseph's not focusing specifically on recycling, I hope you pay close attention, because he's been thinking about how can we combat misinformation online? What are the tactics we can use? What is the tone and messaging we can use to do that? And so with that, I will hand it over to Joseph so we can learn about what might be some, oh, actually, can everyone see the poll? I want to make sure we share the poll results before I transition. No, okay. I might need some and poll and share results. All right, so you can see, hopefully everyone can see them now. And you can see that the vast majority, so something like 96% of our participants today are saying it either has a moderate or strong impact on their recycling program. And so I'll just kind of add to that we've been seeing similar trends in our research. We're very concerned about potentially eroding levels of confidence among our recyclers. And so we're looking sort of in the research for evidence for how we can combat that. And we're very excited to hear what Joseph's found in his research. Joey, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here. Such a wonderful, wonderfully lively group, and such a large group. So thank you for having me. A couple of quick disclaimers before I jump in on the study that I'm going to share. So the first one is just sort of housekeeping. So this study was run by some collaborators of ours. And so I'm sharing it with their permission. I was just a research advisor on this. And then the second one is, it's really, I would call this a pilot. It's a small sample, and so let's treat the results as indicative. And I say that with my research head and hat on. Okay, so let's get started. So jumping in then on this sort of misinformation and sharing of misinformation theme especially, there's this sort of received wisdom around misinformation, especially when it's shared on social media, that we shouldn't reply when people do. And so there's lots of advice that will be given out by various organizations saying, just ignore it, it'll go away, ignore it. And now that might be right. There is definitely some good thinking around if we promote or if we reply to misinformation or respond to it on social media, then we see that the algorithm gives it more juice, more oomph, it gets more eyeballs and sort of is promoted, and that's sort of how social media works. However, that fails to take into account the psychological aspect, and it leaves us in a scenario where people might share misinformation either on purpose or by accident and not get feedback on whether or not that information was right. And given that we operate in a lot of echo chambers, definitely online, but also sometimes offline, we might only receive sort of positive reinforcement for something that is actively wrong. So we set out to run a study where we're looking at what happens when we reply to misinformation online. So we set up this or I should say the study was set up to explore what happens when someone posts misinformation on Twitter and they get a reply, one of a few different conditions to sort of counteract that. So 320 odd misinformants, or people who posted misinformation, were divided into 4 conditions: a control and then 3 experimental conditions. They were in treatment for about 5 weeks. So every time they tweeted, the people would reply, our researchers would reply, and then their following misinformation volumes were tracked. So to give a quick snapshot of the 4 different conditions, the control is the counterfactual. There was no reply to misinformation when it was posted. And then there was a fact check, a reputation, and an empathetic condition. I'll zoom in on the empathetic one because that's the theme we're pulling on here. This one was looking to say, hey, I understand why you thought that, or it's you know, it's plausible that you could think this. However, information has changed, things have moved on, this information is no longer correct. So it's sort of meeting people where they're at, assuming best intent, but also correcting them and updating them. Was one of 3 different experimental conditions, but it's the one I'll focus on. So quickly on the sample, we had about, or this study had about 300 odd people. Only 236 of them were deemed to be active during the study periods. That was about 5 weeks, and that means that they tweeted at all. And actually only a really small number of them, only about 29 just under 30, tweeted misinformation in that period, which is good for the world. There was less information than the study expected, but also bad for the sample size. So did it work? Well, let's first look at, does feedback have an impact? And so we're going to look at, first of all, that sort of 200 odd sample. So this is the intention to treat, or the active sample. And looking at these, the top light blue bar relative to the navy bar below it, you can see there's a big reduction in misinformation tweet volume from that before to after period in the feedback condition relative, or in all of the feedback conditions relative to the control. Where in the control, you can see just below, there's really no difference at all. So it's a pilot, reiterate that. The sample is small, but it looks like feedback seems to be effective at reducing misinformation. When you look just at the small sample, this is the 29 people who posted misinformation during the period. Looking at this top orange bar to the second light blue bar below it, again, we see a similar magnitude, similar effect, and not really any movement in the no feedback. So broadly, I think insofar as it's a pilot, we can say, yes, it looks like feedback seems to work to reduce misinformation. Now let's look at the experimental conditions. I'm going to zoom in on this top one. Again, we have this before and after, light blue to dark blue, and this is the empathetic condition. You can see that there's a reasonably large reduction from before to after, and in the control, which is the bottom, we see really no change at all. Now, of course, the other conditions seem to be working as well, but the empathetic condition does seem to be doing what it should do. And then looking at the small sample, again, just the 30 odd people, you can see on this top one, the top orange to the second light blue, again, a similar effect. Conscious of time, or one more, this just visualizes it in a relative change, and so puts a percentage on it. And you can see they're all hovering at about sort of 6 to 8% change from before to after, and the control has a much smaller change. So it's just sort of a more intuitive way of looking at the effect. So let's take a step back. It seems from this pilot study, we'll call it, just emphasis on that feedback seems to work to deter misinformation, and that taking an empathetic approach seems to be one of the effective ways to do it. Now that's interesting, because if we go back to where Louise started at the beginning of this with that point on intention behavior gap, lots of people intend to do the right thing. And if we go back to Elizabeth's populations, the sort of breakdown in the different types of people who are in this space, lots of them are well-intentioned or at least mildly actively engaged, and we'd probably say the majority are in. Now, if we treat those people when they get something wrong with only a stick or with a disincentive, we might be doing them a disservice, and we might be best treating them as with sort of forgiveness to begin with. Hey, we can see why you made a mistake, and actually this is the right answer. So I think all to say, I think this sort of taking an empathetic, taking that meeting people where they are. This seems to be a promising angle. And I'll finish by putting my testing hat back on and saying, really what we need in this space is much, much more evidence. This is an interesting and indicative angle, but I think we shouldn't take the findings from this as gospel. We should be testing again. I think broadly in this area, there's a sort of lack of really well-designed large studies that test ideas like this and other ideas and give feedback to the whole community about what is working and what isn't. So I would, with my testing hat on, I would plug that angle. Okay, and with that, I'll pass back over. Thank you very much.
Joseph, that was awesome. There's just like, I got so many interconnections to all the other work in my mind now. So I'm just thinking about, like, I'm digesting those poll results right now from earlier that said 96%. So we've got, you know, more than 400 attendees right now, and 96% of them are struggling with misinformation potentially in their programs to either a moderate or a pretty significant extent. My major takeaway here is that we have very positive indication that we can respond to this, we can combat this. And so with the, you know, and I'm hearing that it's by being responsive, by employing the right tone, empathy being one of them, but there's other pathways for us as well. If our audience is interested in learning more from you, following your work, or potentially taking action on these findings, what might you recommend?
So I would say to follow along. The usual channels are always good. Twitter, LinkedIn. I'm at the Center for Advanced Hindsight at Duke. You could follow that center directly. And then in terms of taking action, look, we'd love to hear from you, I think. I think the action that I would encourage is that call to arms on testing. I don't think I would, as a scientist, would say, we have the answer, everyone go do this. I would say, we have some interesting angles. You should be testing, and reach out and chat to us about that and run the really cool experiments. And then you be the one that takes the cool results to the field.
Thank you so much for that. I encourage everyone to you know, jump on that, and we're sort of in the same place. Like we want to test these things, measure impact, and really make sure that we're collectively generating and sharing the evidence to make real change here. Thank you so much, Joseph. I also just want to say again how grateful we are for all that you've done to shape our approach to studying behavior at the Center for Sustainable Behavior and Impact as an advisor. We're so grateful to have you on board and look forward to future conversations with this audience and you. So now we're going to transition to our final speaker. So at the partnership, we like to say, or at the recycling partnership, I should say, so you have the full name, but we like to say that partnership is in our name for a reason. And as I've talked to Lisa about the New York Recycle Right campaign, it's been very clear to me that she's embraced that same approach in their work. They've assembled an incredibly broad stakeholder group to advance a campaign that centers on many of the themes you've heard from Elizabeth, from Michelle, from Joseph about empathy, responsiveness, and taking an audience-centered kind of angular approach to designing a campaign. I also want to note that Lisa is joined by her colleague, Lindsay Eberhardt, who's standing by to support with questions and in the chat and after the presentation. So you may be here, you can get answers from both Lindsay and Lisa as we go. So with that, I'll give you the mic, Lisa. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Louise. It is such an honor to be here today to share our experience with empathetic messaging through the Recycle Right New York campaign. A little bit about us. Recycle Right New York is a comprehensive outreach and education campaign informed by more than 140 recycling professionals aimed at increasing participation and reducing contamination in recycling programs across New York State. This is no simple task, as it is just for the United States. Recycling rules vary all across New York State. We have no standard list of recyclables. My team and I at the Syracuse University Center for Sustainable Community Solutions administer this campaign in partnership with the New York State Center for Sustainable Materials Management, housed at the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry, which is funded by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. So I had to give you all of these wonderfully long names to let you know that essentially there's a state regulating agency partnering with 2 institutions of higher education to deliver this program. So our story starts back in 2018 in response to the China National Sword Market crisis. the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, DEC, held stakeholder meetings all across the state. And at that time, you might remember recycling program leaders were all scrambling to figure out how to reduce contamination levels to increase marketability of their recyclables. There was a huge sense of a lack of control over the volatility of the market situation at the time. But one thing was abundantly clear. In the immediate term, we needed improved, consistent outreach and education about what belongs in the bin and what doesn't. So the DEC led the charge on that for about 2 years before turning it over to us for a rebrand, relaunch of Recycle Right New York 2.0, at which point we created our website, recyclerightny.org. Our stakeholder group is the heart and soul of our campaign. It is still growing, currently made up of 140 recycling professionals across New York State, including lots of municipal recycling coordinators, private sector haulers and operators, sustainability coordinators, environmental nonprofit leaders, industry consultants, and more. We engage our stakeholders in surveys, virtual and in-person meetings, and maintain open lines of communication to gather their perspectives and experiences around what issues and messages are needed for their programs. And then we create content, text, and graphics that they can share on their platforms. We recognize that recycling coordinators are stretched really thin with limited resources for content development, so we provide support and content that is easy for them to share on their channels. So not only does our stakeholder group inform our content, but it is also a mechanism for disseminating that message. Confused about recycling? You are not alone. Early on in our content development journey, back in 2020, our conversations with stakeholders, members of the public, led us to this message. And even with our team's extensive background and years of experience in this field, we relate to this. We still feel confusion and frustration sometimes when making decisions about what belongs in our recycling bin. So this was sort of our natural response to this confusing landscape. We get it. We're here with you. We want to help. I would love to say that this was a really data-driven decision, but the truth is at the time it was really more of an intuitive, organic genesis. But we are thrilled to know now that the data does support this approach, and we will certainly continue to employ this strategy. Another influencing factor is that we did and continue to have a connection with folks at the University of Buffalo in New York who did a study on recycling knowledge and behavior that gave us more item-specific information about where exactly New Yorkers were most confused in the recycling programming. I saw lots of this in the chat, so I already know the answer to this question, that I think we're all facing this sentiment. Why should I bother recycling? It all just gets put in the trash. We hear this repeatedly with our campaign or other variations of this. I see them mix the trash and recyclables in the same truck. Certainly sensationalized news headlines aren't helping. People are really feeling, I think, disheartened that materials that they're working hard to separate and do the right thing by are potentially ending up in the trash. So we decided to approach this concern with transparency, empathy, and validation. And right now, at this point, we are armed with the Recycling Partnership's wonderful research. So we leaned right into that and said, let's take this one head on and see what we can do to help to restore more trust in this system and validate that if this is happening, this is a really terrible thing. So we developed this content for our campaign right in coordination with our state DEC to provide folks with actionable steps they can take if they do witness trash getting mixed with recyclables. And we also took the opportunity to educate on split body trucks. I think this is a major source of confusion for folks on this topic. So when we hear this type of complaint that they're mixing trash with recyclables, I always ask, did you check and make sure that there weren't two compartments in the truck? And many times they're like, oh no, I didn't know about that technology. So I think this is a major point of clarification for people. And we had the opportunity to write an article for the New York State Conservationist magazine, which is coming out next month. And here's a little excerpt just along these lines. You can question, probe, and even sometimes get lost in the mystery of materials management, but still feel pride when you choose to recycle right and keep our recycling streams clean and strong. So where to from here? We are going to continue to work to build trust and connection with our New York State residents. I'm so excited to work more with this audience segmentation idea. Up till this point, we have been trying to reach the general public. And, all of my research and learnings in this field tell me that if you're, speaking to everyone, you're kind of reaching no one. So we're going to lean more into the audience segmentation bits and create more tailored messaging for the different places that people are at with their recycling knowledge and motivation. We're going to build upon our existing tools. We have a few tools right now, the Check Your Local Guidelines tool that we have, but we want to improve upon it. A Recyclopedia with item-specific information and locator tools. We have them for textiles, electronics, and opportunities for reusing materials. And then another angle that I think is really important in this messaging space is to humanize recycling. I think recycling is kind of veiled for people. They don't get to see the facilities or the people or the industry that are actually, dealing with and managing the materials. And I always say the best, most educational thing you can do is go on a tour of a recycling facility, see the scale, smell them, smell the smells, see, the people that are handling the materials. And it's much easier to believe that there is a system in place, not perfect, still room for improvement, but that there's a whole industry of people working to do that improvement. So we want to showcase frontline workers, haulers, transfer stations, MRFs facilities. We want to really illuminate what recycling looks like so that people have more faith in it. And in addition, now we have a pretty good library of content. Of course, we'll still continue creating content, but we are going to be shifting more into getting that content out in front of more eyes and audiences. So opportunities outside of the social media space, including billboards, bus ads, radio, TV, etc. So that's kind of what's on the horizon for us as a campaign. And I really want to thank you so much for your time and attention. All of our resources and graphics are available for free on our website, recyclerightny.org. And if you're interested in hearing more from us, we have a newsletter you can sign up for, and I'm happy to take any questions, be in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And I just want to say again that your thoughtful approach to really listening to your audience and delivering the sort of messaging support that they need based on what you're hearing is really evident. And it's so cool to see it resonate so strongly with our research. We are coming, unfortunately, dangerously close to the close of our webinar, so we won't quite have the time for Q&A that we had hoped. But I think that's because we need more time with all of these incredible presenters. So I'll just do a quick round robin. If I could get Joseph, Elizabeth, Michelle, and Lisa all on camera. What's the one thing you want everyone to walk away from or from this webinar with today? One top line, and anyone can go first. Smith, I see you off mute, so maybe you want to start us off.
I will say that the one thing my takeaway is, looking at the comments and questions in the chat, is evidence-backed solutions. We can do this together, and the more data we have, the more informed solutions we can create. Appreciate so much collaboration. So collaboration is the one thing.
Can I go to Joseph next?
Yes, you can. Thank you. I would echo that and more strongly say, look, the onus is on all of you. I think for us to advance as a field, we have to establish what works and what doesn't work. That can only be done in the field with strong field experimental research. That can only be done with a body of practitioners and interested people who are engaged and excited to build that evidence. So I would say it's a call to arms. We need to be running lots of studies. So let's make it happen.
Thank you for that. Can I go over to Michelle?
Well, yes, I 100% agree, just with what you just said, and we're really excited to do more research. But even with our preliminary research, we're really optimistic about the results and excited to really dig into this further. I think for me personally, though, conducting a lot of this research, I was really challenging myself to keep an open mind. At first, I'm a team player. I saw some of these designs and I agreed to just go forward with them, but I was really skeptical. And I think that that's because the messages really didn't speak to me. But again, just reminding myself that I'm not the audience, I think was really key. And even talking to other recycling coordinators, I mean, a lot of them shared a lot of my skepticism. And so I think that just really focusing on supporting those who need the support, which might not be, which isn't us, and just being open to that, I think is really critical to advancing this work.
Thanks, Michelle. I really appreciate that. And I think that echoes. I'll go to lastly to with a lot of what Lisa's been saying. So Lisa, what's your one takeaway?
Yeah, I don't think it's anything new, but I think it's listen to people and take their concerns and considerations into account and be responsive to that. I think we all kind of want to be heard in the end, right? So I think that's a good path forward to advancing our recycling systems here in the US.
That is the perfect place to pause, and I say pause instead of end our conversation, because we will be reconvening next month to continue the discussion around how we can really better support people, better listen to people, and deliver the solutions they need to improve recycling participation. If Paloma hasn't already done this, she's going to put a bunch of links in the chat, so to help you to direct you to where you can download the knowledge report, where you can sign up for our Recycling Program Solutions Hub, where all of these reports will be available. We, again, want to put in a plug for completing the post-webinar survey. We want to do this again and again, and can only do that with your feedback. And then please make sure you're registered for next month's webinar, which will be on October 25th at the same time. And then lastly, look out for a save the date for a very special event coming up in early 2024 in California, where we'll be bringing our team together in person to share all that we know about designing with behavior in mind. So with that, I thank you all so much for joining us and very much look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you, Lisa, Joseph, Elizabeth, and Michelle. Take care, everyone.